Presentation on Introduction to Percents. A couple key concepts that you need to know about percents. A percent is a ratio that is a fraction out of 100. And that's an important phrase right there, out of 100. Okay, so remember, percent is always out of 100. That makes it a ratio. Okay, the ratio is out of 100. Okay, I'll repeat that here, just that's how important it is. Common ways of writing percents is we can use a percent symbol, we can write the word percent, or an abbreviation for it. Ratios and fractions can be written as percent as long as the denominator is 100. Decimals can be written as percent by writing the number to the hundredths place. Okay, so as long as we keep numbers out of 100 or convert them to out of 100, we can figure out what they are as decimals and fractions are as percents, and we can convert between them. Okay, let's go with our first example. In our first example, we have grids here that are out of 100, so that's going to make this a little easier to do the start. Okay, so since I know it's a 10 by 10 grid, that means there's 100 squares. The first thing I'm going to do is just count how many shaded squares there are. So in the first one, when I count them, I can count by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, plus 3 more. So that means this fraction is going to be 43 out of 100. That's how many are shaded. As a decimal, that would be 43 hundredths, which would be 0.43, 43 hundredths, tenths, hundredths place. And then as a percent, since a percent is a ratio out of 100, 43 out of 100 means the percent would be 43%. And that's how you would write that as a percent. In number 2, we have 2 grids. That means we have one full grid and then a partial of another grid. When we write that, we can write that as one full grid, and then 19 out of the other 100 are filled in. So I write that as a whole number. I have one full grid done. Or if I were to write that as an improper fraction, that would be 100 filled in for the first plus the 19 would be 119 out of 100. The reason it's out of 100 is because there's 100 squares per grid. So that is what my denominator is. If they were combined, then that would be different. But since it's 2 separate grids and they're each out of 100, then that means my denominator is 100. As a decimal, that would be 1.19, 1 and 19 hundredths. And as a percent, that would be 119 out of 100. So that would be 119%, or over 100%. Okay. I'm going to go on to example 2. In example 2 here, we're going to have grids that are not 10 by 10 grids. So in the first grid, we have a 5 by 5 grid, which means that there's 25 boxes. I count how many are shaded, and there are 11, so my fraction is going to be 11 out of 25. Now, in order to turn it into a decimal percent, I need to make that out of 100 so that I can convert them, which means I'm just going to multiply these both by 4, and that's going to give me 44 out of 100. Okay, and now I can write as a decimal, 44 hundredths would be 0.44, and then as a percent, that's 44 out of 100, so that's 44%. Okay, in example 4, I have 4 triangles per box, so 4 sections per box, and I have 7 of them shaded in, so I have 7/4 of them shaded in. Remember, they're 2 separate boxes and there's 4 per box. That's why my denominator is 4. Or I could write that as 1 3/4. Okay, one full one and then 3/4 of the other one. Now to write that as a decimal and a percent, I want to convert that out of 100. So 4 times 25 is 100. So I'm going to multiply those both by 25, and that's going to give me 1 75 hundredths. Okay, now to write that as a decimal, that's going to be 1 75 hundredths, so 1.75. And to write that as a percent, that's going to be the 1 is going to be the 100%, and 75, so it's going to be 175%. And that's how you would write that. Okay, if you need to go back and rewatch anything, go ahead. Otherwise, have a great night.